God is calling everyone, what would that look like? Is there more to faith than Sunday church? What if faith wasn't what we thought it was? What if it was more simple and less abstract than we had imagined?
It's something that you're aware of that makes a difference to everything that you do. And I would hope that with my life, if it's full of faith, that is His fragrance.
I'm Daniel, and this is Estelle. With our friends, we realized that we all had the same questions. We wanted to hear more from spiritual fathers and mothers. So we decided to go on an adventure to find and interview people from different parts of the world. Some are using art and entertainment to bring hope and healing to the heart. You'll be amazed to see how healthcare is reinvented on medical ships, and how science and technology is making miracles for those in need. Some bring God's kingdom in business, while others are fighting against injustice, finding solutions with the government. Our feet walked on all kinds of lands and saw the beauty of so many cultures. We heard stories of obedience, faith, perseverance, and trials. So many have gone through difficulties and doubts in their calling. In this first episode, we'll follow people who love to bring the gospel to the ends of the earth. Here we are on the beautiful island of Hawaii. Our first stop is in Kona to visit Loren and Darlene Cunningham, the founders of Youth with a Mission. They had impacted people's lives all over the globe and yet maintained an unpretentious lifestyle.
Hi, fine. Good to see you as well. Hi, good come in.
If you had a chance to sit down with them, you'll know there's never a dull moment. Loren always has a new story from his last trip, and we were amazed how they heard God's voice so well.
He said, I want you to go to Hawaii. I said, when, Lord? He said, tomorrow, continental noon flight. So I called them, and they said, yes, we have a noon flight, exactly noon tomorrow, and it's a 747. I said, I want on that plane. They said, oh, I'm sorry, it's already fully booked. I said, well, put me on the waiting list. And then a little pause, and they said, we're sorry, that's full too, but there is one at 4:30. And I thought, well, at least I got part of that right. Okay. Next morning, Lord said to me, I didn't say 4:30, I said noon, Loren. I got a carry-on bag, went to the airport, bought an open ticket. They said, you can't get on the plane. I said, I know. And so I went out to the gate, handed it to the guy at the desk there by the gate. Looked up, and there's a big 747 right there. And he looked at it, and he said, you don't have reservation. I said, I know, but I want on that plane. And he's trying to give me my ticket back, and I backed up and smiled at him, you know. We've boarded the plane, it's full. So you can stand in line. I said, if you don't mind, I don't like lines. Can I sit over? He said, do what you want to. So I went over and I found a row of seats, and there was one right on the end that was right by the entry, you know, the ramp into the plane. So I sat on that one, and then I leaned forward and kept looking up. See, when you obey the Lord, you go as far as you can, and then you lean forward. In other words, you do just a little bit more in anticipation of what God's going to do. So I'm leaning like this. Man came down. Halfway down, he pointed at me and said, Mr. Cunningham? I said, yes, get on board. I walked on. He went the other way. And the lady at the door said, why are you coming? There's no room. And we're already full. I said, well, the agent told me to get on board. And so she said, well, go back and talk to the purser. And I looked back there and saw him, and he saw me. And I was coming toward him, and I'd asked God ahead of time, Lord, I'd like a window seat. Look, no seats, no seats, no. He found one, pointed at it, I climbed in next to the window. I put my suitcase underneath where we're backing up already. I buckled up, and I said, God, why do you want me to go to Hawaii? I had no idea. The Lord said, I want you to go to Kona. It's going to be a lighthouse to the nations. And I said, okay. Well, when we got to Kona, there wasn't even a grocery store in Kailua Kona. Anyway, the Lord allowed us to buy a old rundown hotel. No water, no toilets or anything. It was a mess. But for us, it was Canaan land. And today, we have 1,000 beds. We have teams going out. They usually go to about 50 nations every quarter.
Today, Youth with a Mission is a massive volunteer organization that has training centers all around the globe and sends out thousands of young missionaries to share the gospel. It all started with a vision. Loren saw waves crashing onto all the continents. They were crashing further and further until the land was completely covered. And as he watched, the waves were transformed into young people, sharing their faith, sharing the gospel, leaving everything behind to travel with no finances, no security, and no backup plan, with a desire to make a difference. Loren did what God asked him to do. He had no idea as he heard God's voice and trusted his words that so many would be changed and impacted.
I wanted to be a missionary, from day one. You can't come to Youth with a Mission and not have a love for the nations. Man, we met my wife in University of the Nations. We want to go to French-speaking Africa, use French, And then all of a sudden get this call to go back to my hometown. And I'm like, what? I've left that, I'm called to the nations. What's going on? Skin ripped off, bones exposed, was collapsing, unmasking the real from the fraudulent. You are that one, put that heart in my chest. Look like you in my lungs is your breath. See what happened when words become action. Nothing surpassing the past of our passion. Cut up flesh, brutal skull, torture fashion. Skin ripped off, bones exposed, was collapsing, unmasking the real from the fraudulent. One of the biggest drug dealers in our city gave his life to Jesus because one of his dealers, right, gave his life to the Lord, and then we got all of his stuff together, like $3,000 worth of stuff, him and another guy, and they burned all of their stuff, like $3,000 worth of drugs and other stuff, and then we put that on Facebook. And so a little while later, I get this call, or not a call, an inbox message on my Facebook from this drug dealer. He's like, how can I become a disciple of Jesus Christ? And I'm like, let's just meet. And so we met over Skype, and I would disciple him every week. This guy was making sometimes over $100,000 a week selling drugs. He had about 30 guys under him that was a part of his organization, and he shut the whole thing down and gave his life to the Lord. So being back, as a missionary in my hometown, God, all of a sudden, as my heart is for the nation, started showing me the importance of the local church. My parents are home, they're watching Star Trek. I'm 19 years old. What am I doing at home Friday night, Saturday night, just reading my Bible? I felt like a nerd, I didn't know what's going on. But it was the loneliest time, but at the same time, it was some of the most precious time of my whole life because all I had was Jesus. And he was the one who would comfort me. He was the one who would come and teach me. It was in those times, I remember after about 3 months, I get a phone call from one of my closest friends. He was like an older brother to me. And he was on 18 criminal charges and facing time in the penitentiary. He was on trial. He said, Christophe, I want you to show me this Jesus that's changed your life. teachers and principals and basketball coaches started asking our friends, our group of friends, to come into the schools, public schools, to talk about our life transformation.
Want some water? He still runs into old teachers when we're back home in Canada, and they'll be like, so what are you doing now? And when he tells them, they're like, what? Like, you were never in class, and when you were in class, your eyes were bloodshot and you weren't even paying attention. You never did your homework and you failed your tests, and he was gonna end up in jail or dead, basically. That was the direction he was going. One of the biggest trials at the beginning was stepping into something that looked foolish to other people. Like, how are you gonna go around the world when you can not provide for your family, right? You're walking in obedience. God has given you a word. He's said to do something. You're like, okay, we're doing this. It doesn't make sense to the natural mind.
We followed Christophe on his trip to Southeast Asia. He had organized a local conference in Myanmar with other evangelists. Christophe shared with Estelle that on his way in the plane, he had given a Bible to a woman as he shared the gospel with her. We saw the joy and love Christophe had for this woman.
We're praying for Nunu here in her home, and then we'd been praying for a while, and her legs were really off, like this much off. And so I just started singing something. I started singing, "We Demand a Miracle." We demand this miracle. Yeah. And literally growth just started happening, and it came from like this much off to like right there.
Rhonda, Jesus. Yes. Hallelujah. Yes. Yes.
Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord.
Woo!
Yes.
So good, man. Thank you, Jesus.
These evangelists had a deep understanding of the liberating power of the gospel. No matter how many times it happened, they were moved when they saw someone meet Jesus for the first time. God's manifest presence was here, moving through simple faith of youth. Everywhere we went, miracles took place. And many were hearing truth they'd never heard before. We met Sunawh, who was leading all these teams in Myanmar.
Christophe is my absolute best friend, and the greatest joy of stepping out in faith, building the kingdom, is who we get to do it with. We've known each other for 15 years. We met in 2005 because we came out of such similar backgrounds.
You know, it does.
I knew that Myanmar was the one that I was supposed to step into. So when the invitation came, I responded, I said yes. He said, hey, will you come and preach at this gospel crusade for 4 nights? And I told him, I don't want to preach at a gospel crusade only. I'm believing for your nation to be transformed. So Doe, who gave me this invitation, had been carrying this multi-generational story in his heart. When I told him, hey, let's believe for transformation, he knew it was the time. In the early 1900s, his great-grandfather was one of the first believers from the tribe that they are from. And he had an open vision where he saw foreigners flooding into the nation of Myanmar, and that this would be a sign that it was a kairos moment for transformation in the nation. His great-grandfather had this vision, his grandfather carried the vision, his father carried the vision, and then now he was carrying that same vision. And even though he grew up in a village where he didn't own his first pair of shoes till he was 12, a plane would fly by their village and his father would be like, prophesy to that plane that one day our nation will be transformed and will be a great mission-sending nation. And as we've been going into Myanmar, every time we've preached the gospel of hope, we've seen these children having extended encounters with the goodness of God. Some of them standing before the altar of the Lord for 2-3 hours, just weeping, crying under His presence. As we asked these children, they would say their hearts were being filled with hope. They were speaking of this hope in the midst of their suffering.
Kevin has seen thousands of people come to Christ. God had transformed his life so much that he just couldn't stay quiet.
In my beginning, my early years of Christianity, I used to try to share my faith because I was a disciple and I figured that's what you're supposed to do. But for a long time, for a few months, everybody I shared the gospel with didn't want anything to do with Jesus. And then one day I was driving in the U.S. and somebody was hitchhiking and I got inside my car and I was listening to the Gospel of John. And all of a sudden, this young man just started weeping and weeping and just crying. And I would sort of become so dull to the Holy Spirit in this area because I'd really set a wall, just like I'm not going to do evangelism. I looked at him, I said, "What is wrong?" And he goes, I need Jesus, I need Jesus. And so I was sort of startled at first, and I heard the Holy Spirit so clear. He goes, "Kevin, it's not you, it's me." It's just, yeah, sorry. And there's sort of still a bit, we just have these little conversations. It's like, one more time. Jesus. You get to preach this gospel one more time.
It was not about traveling to the ends of the earth and then coming back with great stories. In Myanmar, it all started with a simple faith, and God then multiplied the fruit of their work. 3 years later, they are in many cities and seen thousands of people come to listen to the gospel.
As they were praying, a little girl started pushing through the crowd, and she actually brought this note here. The note said, "Can I have one of the book of the Bible?" This really impacted me, that a girl around 10 years old wanted a Bible so bad that she had someone write on a note and take it to one of our team members. And we actually had already handed out all the Bibles. Just reminded me how much I take having a Bible in my language and a Bible available to me anytime I want, either on my phone or back home. I take that for granted sometimes. A few years ago, a team and I went up to a village or very remote district up in the Himalayas. We were able to give an audio device to a woman in the village, and she told us the next day, she says, "As I listened to these words on this audio device, I cry." And she said, "I didn't know why I cry, but I was sitting there thinking, I cry because this is the truth."
People stopping us on mountain passes that they say, "Hey, a team came to my village several months ago and a blind man was healed. And I've been wondering, how do I follow this Jesus? I remember one instance of one of our first treks into the Himalayas to do this Bible distribution project in the Jesus film. I was with my dad, who was at the time probably 69, and we trekked all day over a mountain pass and persevered over this mountain. And my 10-year-old son, you know, we're having a blast. We're exhausted though, and just thinking to myself, this village is so worth it. These 6 homes, these 6 families that are so far off the beaten path and removed from modern society.
This can be bumpy. Hang on. Oh no. Hang on. Oh, our bags.
And I remember watching the joy on the face of one of the men as he listened to the audio Bible for the first time in his life. He heard the words of truth, and it's like you don't know in that moment. For him, he doesn't know how he should act. He doesn't realize how far we've come. He's not putting on a show. He has none of those formalities, and yet there was so much joy on his face. And about a year later, saw a cover of a magazine, and what stunned me was that he was on the cover of the magazine. Well, the man had fully given his life to Jesus in the following months, and the picture was of him with this huge basket on his head full of Bibles that now he was trekking into all of the surrounding villages. I was just stunned just to see the power of perseverance and really believing in God's love for the one, that we'd not only obey, but we'd obey for the long term. We'd not only fall in love, but we would stay in love.
We are making history together.
My passion is to be a missions catalyst, to see young people, all ages, catalyzed into a missional lifestyle.
Climbing those cliffs and going beyond our comfort zone takes courage and is many times difficult and painful. Faith is just the same. We have to be courageous to go beyond our understanding and surroundings. All the people we met had their moments of doubts and challenges. But they all considered what God had given them and didn't quit no matter what.
As I've been carrying this whole Myanmar initiative, so many times where I've wanted to quit, where my persevering faith feels like it's hit a wall, or it's coming to the end of a cliff and I'm gonna fall off. And where I'm overly worried and expressing that worry, and Christophe's been there to listen. And he reminds me of my story with God in this area, where I'm so blinded by the circumstance and the worry. He goes, son, don't forget what God spoke to us after India. Don't forget how we provided that last time. He's gonna do it again this time.
Okay, if you say yes to God, it's gonna be amazing. You could come and, you know, change the world, and it's gonna be incredible. It's gonna be hard. There's gonna be times like, okay, God, you got to provide. How are we gonna do this? I have a family, I have house payments, I have kids. But I believe that so many people would love to walk on water, but no one wants to step out of the boat.
But I also say one of the most amazing seasons in my whole life was also one of the most difficult, and it was, through losing my mom to cancer. It was awful. You just never imagine you'll be in those moments, and you certainly never rehearse what you're going to do in those moments. You don't ever want to be there. I woke my brother up, and we sat on the edge of the bed that was right next to Mom, and in prayer, and just said, God, we refuse to believe that you're anything but good. We don't understand this, but we just declare that we don't need to understand right now. And I'm so grateful that when that had happened, I'd had enough of a foundation in his nature and character. And when that shook my family, and when it shook my life, it caused me to run to him instead of away from him.
This is Janice, Loren's little sister. She's the writer behind all of Loren's books. What caught us by surprise is that she never thought of being a writer. She wanted to be a missionary. But through her writing, God has used her beyond her dreams to inspire mission to every corner of the earth.
There was one time that came up, and it was so drastic, but a book that I had edited for someone was drastically rejected and re-edited. And I didn't agree with what they did. There were artistic differences, but it was out of my hands. And I hit such despair. Well, it's silly to even think it now, but I just felt like I should just give up. I couldn't write anymore. This was it, you know. On that very day, I get a phone call from Loren somewhere in the world on a little island named Swain's Island. It has a population of 12 people. And he had a stack of gifts to give as island protocol demands. And on the top was his book, Is That Really You, God? He was going to turn it over and show the picture of him with his family so that they would know they weren't pirates. But as he turns it, her son, her teenage boy, gets all excited. And he points to his mom, and she says, we've already read that book. And it just soaked into me. It was like God just let me know that day.
This book was translated in 135 languages. It is to this day the third most printed in the world. Janice and Loren could have easily made a lot of money, but they chose to give it away.
Everyone can have faith, it's a gift. But to use the faith, you're going to have tests of faith. That's how you grow. You're born with all your muscles, but they don't work when you're born. And you have to use them, and then they grow in strength the more you use them. And faith is the same way. And a test of faith is coming where your faith isn't strong enough to do that. But you say, but with God, all things are possible. And so you rise to that faith, and your faith actually grows so that you can handle what God has given you as He gives it to you.
What does obedience mean to me? You know, I think what's been helped me articulate this, at least in this last year or so, has been there from the book of James, the first few verses, where it talks about perseverance leads to faith, and that we have to develop the I won't quit spirit. And I think that's really essential in hearing the voice of the Lord, that I'm not going to negotiate. The answer is yes, I just need to know what it is. Because the Bible says if you're double-minded, if you're going to be like the waves of the sea, don't expect my answer. But if you are single-minded, in other words, there's no bartering, there's no negotiating, I'm going to give you wisdom way beyond your abilities. And in truth, that's the whole secret to Youth with a Mission. That's why some 22-year-old can do remarkable things way beyond their experience or education.
As we traveled, we wanted to share one last story. we met Yasmina, a young girl from the Middle East. She shared with us her story that a missionary family with 5 children had intentionally left their country to move to hers when God gave them a vision of an Oriental woman. And this woman was her mum. It was a cold winter. Yasmina, her little brother, and her mum had walked for what seemed like an eternity. They needed a place to stay, and no one wanted them in their house, not even their granddad. Her mum tucked them up outside, and they fell asleep. She started pouring gasoline around them to burn them before killing herself. For as long as she can remember, her father would come home drunk with anger and take it out on her mother. They had nothing to eat as he spent all the money on gambling. Her mum would go door to door asking for work. One day, she found a job as a housewife for a family of 7 children. Sometimes she would take Yasmina and her brother with her to spend the night there. At home, her mum had prepared a suitcase. She said, "We might have to leave this house." And that night, it happened. Her mum poured gasoline around them to burn them before killing herself. She fell on her knees, weeping and crying, "If you're real, God, show me who you are. I'm so tired of this life. My heart is dead. Please reveal yourself to me." Suddenly, a bright light appeared in a long stream of stairs coming down from the sky. At the top, there were women praising God and reading some kind of book. Among them was a man with a royal turban on his head, but she couldn't see his face. His clothes were white, and you could see scars in his hands. He started speaking in her language. "I am God. I am the only God. And you are mine. I want you to know that I love you. You need to live for your children and grow them for my kingdom." Those words filled her with indescribable peace. For the first time, her heart was filled with hope. She asked him, "Where will I find you?" He pointed at the book the women were reading, and then they were gone. Her mum was so excited she couldn't wait for the morning to come. At sunrise, she ran back to the family she worked for and said, "I need that book you have. I need that book. I saw you have that book." The woman at the house asked, "Which book are you talking about?" Her mother said, "The Bible. I need the Bible. I need that book because the holy man told me that I would find him in there." And she told them the whole story of what had happened last night. Tears began to fill their eyes as they listened and said, "You saw Jesus? That was him?" The lady of the house continued, 7 years ago, as we were praying, God showed us a location we should go to. We had never heard of that country before, so we looked it up on a map. God told us that a woman would come knocking at our door and ask for some work. We should let her in and love her well. So with our 5 kids, we moved here. And this woman was you. Today, her mother's life has changed completely, and she started a center that takes care of women. She conducts Bible studies with them, and every day is a miracle, but what keeps her going is she found the liberating truth, and she just won't stop sharing it. In this story, we're reminded of Abraham, the father of all believers. Scripture says God counted him as righteous, who heard the voice of God, who trusted his words and transformed his life to impact generations. Listening to all these stories, we just wanted one thing: go out there and experience what they had experienced. We had been exposed to the fragrance of faith. You can be right, but will you fight the good fight? You can say yes, but will you run the full race? You can have faith, but will you keep that faith? In the next episode, we went to discover people that are providing solutions in healthcare, making low-cost technology, and fighting against injustice with the government.